I'm actually calling a special meeting to order, and we're going to do a roll call and a single resolution, and then we'll end the special meeting and go into a workshop. So let me call the meeting to order. Because it's a regular meeting, we'll do a pledge. Can we do that? We're going to do it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me do a quick roll call. At the moment, I am seeing Molly, George, Paloma, Ren, and Lee. I see the city administrator. Is there someone online for the city attorney?
No, coming
Not
for the
just
next
yet,
meeting.
but we're expecting him to come. All right.
And Dan is excused.
Okay. And we have one item of business, so that one item, and because it's a special meeting, there isn't a public comment section. We'll pick that up next week. So I'm looking for a motion and a second appointing Arkeem Gorham to the position of police officer.
Motion.
Second. So Molly and George. Chief, do you want to introduce Arkeem?
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it. I'm here to present to you tonight Arkeem Gorham for the position of police officer for the City of Beacon Police Department. Arkeem's 28 years old. He spent most of his adult life in services and occupations helping other people. He's a very busy man. He's works part-time for the town of Marlborough Police Department, the town of Fishkill Police Department, and the village of Fishkill Police Department as a police officer. He also works part-time for Mobile Life Support as an emergency medical technician, and he's a volunteer fire chief with Middle Hope Fire Department. Some other occupations Arkeem has held in his past is emergency medical technician for American Medical Response in Connecticut, a backhauler and selector for C&S Wholesale Grocers and Unfee Wholesale Grocers. He was a safety coordinator at Partners in Safety. He was an EMT for the town of Newburgh Emergency Medical Services, and part-time police officer for the town of Plattekill Police Department, and a safety coordinator for Schiavone Construction. He does come with some credentials that are very helpful for the people of the city of Beacon. It's going to definitely be an asset for this city. He's already graduated from the Ulster County Law Enforcement Academy, which means we don't have to send him to the academy. We can start him on field training right away, which will speed up the process of actually getting Arkeem on the street and working on his own. He's certified emergency medical technician. He's a CPR and first aid instructor. He's a bloodborne and airborne pathogens instructor. He's certified with the Data Master, which is the breathalyzer that we have downstairs. He's a Stop the Bleed instructor, a cold and ice water rescue technician, a child passenger seat safety seat technician, and he's certified as a field trainer with the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. He's had a lengthy background. He's passed physical agility tests, polygraph, psychological exam, criminal history, check with past employers, neighborhood canvass, domestic relationships, financial history. Our backgrounds are pretty in-depth. They take a while. He's done an excellent job. I personally know the chief of police from Marlborough, town of Fishkill, and village of Fishkill. They all talk very highly of Arkeem, and nothing really negative on him that's coming up that to speak of. And I think he's going to be a good asset for the city of Beacon.
Okay. Would you add anything, Chris, or not?
I would just like to add for the public that Arkeem did attend our meeting last week in executive session. So the council did have a chance to meet, as we do with all candidates, to meet Arkeem and to talk a little bit with him. We do that with police officers and department heads.
And just in terms of timing, there was an element of wanting to get him hired before a certain date for various hiring reasons. There were some incidental reasons, like we could get the backbenchers in the room for this meeting. We're sure we could get them for the next meeting. And then finally, if we waited another week, you'd probably end up at another part-time department or another volunteer position, and we were just worried. So,
Correct.
Is that okay?
His physical agility test, it's good for a year, and it was expiring on May 14th. He would have to take another one, which is until June, and then we'd have to see, where he places on the list.
I knew there was a better reason than the ones I came up with.
Yes.
Any comments from
So-
the council? All right, all in favor of appointing Arkeem Gorham to the position of police officer, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, congratulations. I got to do a swearing in.
Why don't you get sworn in first?
All right. You're great. You can come back now. So
His hands don't go too far.
yeah. So give me your right hand and repeat. I, Arkeem Gorham,
I, Arkeem Gorham,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I'll support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of police
the
officer
duties of police officer
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. And any last words before you have to watch what you say?
Just want to say thank you guys for your consideration. Truly appreciate it, and I will do my best to serve the city of Beacon.
All right. And the chief wants what photo out? The photo with the family. Whatever.
I'm going to start charging the Highland Current for my photos. Hey, can we have your new family in here too? Okay, we can absolutely. I'll send them down. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
And then we
We're
need
not
to
done yet.
adjourn that meeting.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
So I think that was Molly and Ren, all in favor? Aye. Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Okay.
Okay, on to workshop.
All right. So I'm going to open a workshop. That's what's next on the agenda. I see all the council members present for the workshop, with the exception of Dan, who is excused. Welcome. And let's keep going. So, first order of business, is John Clark on the phone, on the Zoom or whatever?
Yeah, he's on Zoom. Hey, John.
Yes, no, maybe? Are you going to engage in the discussion, or is Nick, and are we waiting for Nick?
Nick wrote the memo, so I thought he'd take the lead, but if he's not on, I can start.
Well, the other one was we can just skip down and come back.
We could do that. Nick thought he would be here by 7:15, so we could do a couple of these other items.
Would that be okay with the council if we deferred on item 1 and came back to it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone good? I heard a unanimous yes. So the next one is appointing James Eve to the Recreation Committee. That was a application that we received. I've actually known Jim Eve for probably 30 years. He lived in Ward 2, so he was one of the people I met 30-some years ago when I was first running. He was active in the community back then, did a lot in the recreation area, and is willing to serve the community still. So I'd be happily put him forward. He knows a great deal about not only the history of Beacon, but also its diversity, so I was pleased to see him apply. Any questions or comments?
This wasn't on his resume, but I appreciated learning that he's a poet.
Oh, yeah, interesting. So I didn't know that one. Anything else? Okay. He lives on Sargent, right? And I think he's been there maybe his entire time in Beacon. I think his career was in corrections, I believe, right? Yeah. Next item is traffic and safety recommendations regarding parking and roadway signage. Ben, you're going to tell us what all this means.
Correct. One of my hats is that I sit as secretary to the Traffic and Parking Safety Committee, and put together a couple recommendations they've made for your review. If you decide you'd like to move forward with it, then we will put together a draft local law for you to review for next time, and then think about voting to set a public hearing at next week's meeting. There was 2 recommendations made by the committee based on feedback from members in the community. The first is changing an intersection at DeWint and South Walnut from a 2-way stop to a 4-way stop, and this was one that was a pretty easy yes for most of them, from most of the committee members. So that's the first of the 2.
And
the
then
second
we
is,
have the graphic if you want to put the graphic up.
sure, I can pull it up.
Sometimes
If the council would like
easier to-
helpful. Give me one moment, please. And it looks like Nick has joined us, by the way, by Zoom.
Oh,
Aw.
Good evening.
we even took his name tag out.
I will be there shortly, yes. I'm in transit.
Oh, all right. We're deferring item 1 until you're here, so.
Great,
All
thank
right.
you.
I'm prepared to bring up the graphic now. Okay, so the first is, can everyone see this all right?
Yes.
All right, the first what I just described is South Walnut and DeWint, making that from a 2 to a 4-way stop. And that the second one
Let me just
is
ask a
extending.
question on that, if you back it up a second. So if I recall, if I'm going from Henry to Cliff Street on DeWint, first it's Henry, and then there's a stop sign at Henry and South Chestnut, which is where DeWint begins. Then there is a second stop sign that's recently installed at DeWint and South Brett, which I believe is 2 blocks past South Chestnut. I don't think there's a stop sign at South Cedar. Then Walnut would be 2 blocks, no, 1 block past South Brett. That's correct, I believe. Is that accurate, Ben?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure about all the surrounding areas. You would probably know better than me, but I can certainly do some research on that for the next time if you'd like a more zoomed out view of what the stop sign in the area looks like.
I'm pretty sure I got it right. And so what we're doing is now we added the one at South Brett, we're adding the one at South Walnut, and then it's from South Walnut up to the end of DeWint at Cliff is now limited down to 3 blocks. So I just wanted to describe where we're at. And again, this is the second stop sign we're adding in that thoroughfare, in that area. So I just wanted to point that out to the council.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm good on that.
Any other questions or discussion on this one? I'm happy to do my best to answer.
Just sort of piggybacking on what Lee said, I'll say this also kind of aligns with what our Main Street Access Committee was recommending, was looking at sort of managing traffic 1 block north or south of Main Street. And so along with what the Parking and Traffic Safety Committee was talking about some driver behavior around this intersection, I think adding more, yes, there are more stop signs at multiple intersections, but I think it aligns with our direction for the city overall as well.
Yep. No, I agree. I think we're doing exactly the same thing on Church Street, which is the equivalent street on the opposite side of Main. And both of those were, as some of you recall, supposed to be thoroughfares, which is why Church Street between Eliza and South Chestnut is double width, and then Henry Street is double width. And so that was given up quite some time ago. In some respects, we're simply adjusting it to the realities there, and the stop signs on both streets make a lot of sense. So I agree with Councilmember Rhodes on this. Everybody good?
I'm good.
All right.
All right. So the second recommendation for your consideration is extending some existing no parking during any hours of the day to the north side of East Main between Mountain and Shea. I believe the south side was addressed somewhat recently, maybe last year, by the council, but the committee does regularly hear concerned citizens about the width of these streets or this stretch when there's parking along these either side has led to some issues of navigability. So that's why they recommended extending that a bit more to alleviate congestion and make it easier to get through the stretch of roadway.
And could you repeat the section that you're referring to, Ben?
It's the section that's blue, and that is the north side of East Main between Shea and Mountain Lane.
I think it's Shay.
Yeah, I think it's
Shea,
I'm
my mistake.
really glad to see that the Traffic and Safety Committee took this up. I know that neighbors there have been working on this for, well, I saw a petition collected 10 years ago. So, you know, it's been off and on because of COVID. I think it you know, went up and down, and of course changes with the seasons, but I'm glad to see this happening.
Ben, can you share with the new no parking, was that at all related to emergency vehicle access along that stretch of East Main?
I'd have to go back and check my notes. This one was recommended a while back. We just tend to try and bring several at once for the sake of efficiency and passing local laws. I can certainly do that for our meeting, though. Go back and review the discussion points a little bit more in depth.
Great. Yeah, I think when we think of, you know, that's very close to Pocket Road, which a lot of people like to hike on, so I think just being clear about why we think this takes away parking near that entrance to the mountain, but the reasons why for safety, we think it's a good reason, would be great to bring up when we talk about this publicly and have a public hearing about it, if we choose to do so.
Absolutely.
And we will be rebuilding the water tank at the end on Pocket Road at some point, and I hope to get some parking spaces for local residents if I can, as we do that project. It really depends on where the footprint of the tank ends up, but I've definitely put that on the engineer's radar that's a goal. So if we can build a little 5 or 10 car lot up there once we reconfigure it, we would do that. But that's some years out, yeah.
And I now understand the reference. So Shea Lane had me scratching my head for a moment. So it's where Pocket Road hits. Shea Lane is a dirt road.
Yes.
Is it a private road? I think it's a private road.
It is.
It's not dirt, though. Part of it's paved.
Part of it's paved?
Yeah.
But I think it's private.
Actually, I'm sorry, it's paved.
Is it?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
paved. There's a new house that was just built there this
Got it.
past year.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I just note that lots and lots of places in the city, when we have parking on both sides, creates a narrow lane for passage. You know, and I think we should just be selective as to where we restrict parking. And it's actually a good thing. It slows people down. So I have no issue with this one, though. Any other comments on this one?
If anyone thinks of any and they want to shoot it over as an email, I'm happy to address that at the meeting when this is brought forward next week.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank you, Chris, for noting, I know it's several years out, but the potential for parking when the tank is moved.
And we do still get comments, you know, from time to time about the putting up a gate. That was something that had come up, I think, a couple of years ago and looked like it might be possible. Can you remind us why that ended up not being possible to put up the gate there?
We were discussing the gate on Monument Road, which is the next road up. It's just complex. At the time, the state parks had bought a gate to install just above the Lambs Hill entrance off the road.
Mm-hmm.
And, but again, I think we had a discussion with them that probably wouldn't last very long if they did put it in there. And we had talked to one of the adjacent, the easements there need a lot of research. Like there's multiple easements over the property. At some point when we get some time, I'll unwind some of that and we may look to install a gate there. It's just that about 20 different entities have access to the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it was whether it was going to do anything or not. And again, I don't think we've made a determination either way.
Mm-hmm.
But that is we are just finishing a drinking source water protection plan. And one of the things that was cited was to look at restricting vehicle access up the hill. One of the other reasons we waited is we were finishing the projects on Pocket and then up at Mount Beacon. And that Mount Beacon work is now underway again and hopefully will be finished by the end of May. So we will get back to looking at it.
But just to clarify, people are not supposed to drive up Monument Road all the way to the reservoir.
Well, the cell tower people are allowed to, emergency access people, parks people, to drive up for picnics is not allowed.
It's prohibited,
Yeah.
right? And so we're seeing a lot of just degradation of our natural resources because of the cars that drive up there.
And the enforcement's difficult because that's not the city of Beacon and it's state, the property is partially Scenic Hudson and partially the state.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to unravel.
It is.
There's a reason that not, for the time being, what we're trying to do is put large boulders in the way so cars can't get into the reservoir inadvertently. So at the end of the
great.
project, you'll see new barriers to entry for cars.
That's wonderful. I mean, I've seen four-wheelers driving across the,
Okay.
and getting stuck.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just, they're coming from out of town, a lot of them. But there are people in town who do it too, and it's a shame. It really is. You know, if it's this space belongs to all of us. We should all feel like we need to protect it together. It's our water. It's our land.
So again, I wasn't totally clear. We had the ability legally to put a gate, and it would take some more deed research and the attorneys kind of going through all of the easements.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone good on that? So next item is tree removal and pruning bids. And Chris, you're going to tell us on the results of the bids?
Yes. Okay. So the next three items are bids that we do every 2 years. This one is for tree removal and pruning, and you may remember all the work we did at pruning trees in Memorial Park. We put this back out to bid and had 4 bids. The low bidder is Alpine Tree Service, which is the company that we worked with previously, and that was very good to work with. This was right on the edge of whether we needed to go out for bid or not, so we did go out to bid. We weren't sure how much it was going to end up being. I think the total value of the contract per year should be about $25,000 per year. Again, under our rules, we could have done this through quotes, but since we were doing other things too, we just bid it, and it's a lot simpler sometimes. We're recommending that we award a contract to Alpine Tree Service for 2023 and 2024.
This is just a question out of curiosity. Do you know what makes Dom's Lawn Makers so much more expensive? Did they misunderstand the bid? Does that happen sometimes in terms of what they were looking at or what we needed?
We questioned that as well. I don't know how they came in so much higher. But it is noticeable. Maybe Dom's really good.
Maybe they provide this amazing
I don't know,
service.
they like cookie breakfast and then do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the phenomenon of disparate bids is, you will see it with regularity, right? A bunch will be right in the ballpark, and then there'll be an interesting
An
one.
outlier.
Yeah, and I don't, seen it a long time, and I've still never quite understood, other than they get to make their own estimates, right?
I mean, would it be pipeline, like they're plenty full, and so they're
Could be,
like,
yeah.
I'll
That
do it.
sometimes happens where they're like, yeah, if you want us to do it, I'm going to throw a really high number at you.
Anything else on this one? All right, so that's tree removal and pruning. Now the other one is road paving and bituminous concrete.
Yes.
You would tell us what bituminous, I thought it was bituminous coal.
Well,
Bituminous
there is
concrete.
bituminous coal, but there's also bituminous concrete, which is essentially the same thing as asphalt paving.
Got it.
Okay, so this is our repaving contract, which each year we do, like last year we did about 24 streets. This year we'll probably do about 12 because we're doing larger ones. We go out and we get a price per ton installed bid, and Clove Excavators, which had done this previously for us, got the bid, and they were great last year, and we're very comfortable working with them. So this is, again, a 2-year price. This is a much larger contract. It's probably going to be in the $400,000 to $500,000 range per year. Because, again, we use our CHIPS money, our Consolidated Highway Improvement Program money from the state to do that repaving each year. And we try to do as many streets as we can with the available funding. So we're still waiting to confirm how much we're getting this year. It's usually, again, between $400,000 and $500,000.
Any questions, comments? You want to pronounce bituminous a few more times?
That's a great
Bituminous.
word. I had the same question. Is there a rough estimate of when we can share with the public the list of streets where we're hoping to pave this year?
Yeah, we're probably going to do the paving in September or October, and I'm hoping to have a list in by the time I present a capital budget to you, which is the end of May.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I know Mickey's been going back and forth on there's like a couple large streets that we were thinking about taking a run at, like Beekman, and that would basically use up a lot of our funding. So he's still doing the trade-offs between doing a lot more smaller local streets or that, big area which needs some improvement. But I'll have that when we do the capital.
You ready to do the next one, folks? All right, asphalt milling bid.
Careful.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, so before we pave, we have to do the milling where we go down about a ½ inch of pavement. Last year, we did 5 or 6 days of this. So again, this contract's probably valued at about $30,000, $35,000 at the high end. So it was worth going out to bid. The low bidder is A. Colarusa and Son, who again did our work last year too. So last year we had A. Colarusa followed by Clove, and I felt like we got good value on that. So we're comfortable moving forward with their bid, and next week we would have resolutions authorizing me to sign contracts with all 3 entities.
So, quality control on this part, I'm just looking for just a little understanding of the technical aspect of grinding down the road. When I'm walking around, I'm looking at the drains. I see that some of them don't, the way that the asphalt comes up, it's high.
Mhm.
The asphalt seems high. What are we looking for in terms of the milling? Is there a range of what
Well,
we get around our streets?
We do the milling around, we call those structures, so any kind of storm drain, manholes, other sundry things. We do the detail work around that. So we have smaller machines. Colarusa has a very large machine that just is about volume. It goes through and it, with 2 or 3 passes, takes off the whole top. And our folks go back in and they do the hand work around those elements. So you'll see our crews working hand in hand with the other companies.
Okay.
We do have to pitch things so that they drain correctly. I know in certain circumstances, we've gone back and had to make sure things were more level so that there wasn't like a deep, like a hole as you were driving over it. But our folks do that in-house.
When I'm driving around and I'm seeing, big pools of water collect, I don't know if I'm seeing something that I need to tell you about.
Yeah, it depends how long it's there. Like, we've been getting rains where our stormwater system isn't able to handle it all at once, but over the next day or two, it does clear up. We have a couple chronic areas where we have to go and clean out. On Cliff Street near Maine, I've had to have that cleaned out, and at some point, we're going to have to put a larger drain. We've had some issues on South Walnut, but they're really expensive fixes. You'd have to run a whole new storm pipe system. So for the most part, I think we do pretty well on drainage, but it can last. We've been getting inundated lately. Like, our wastewater treatment plant had 11 million gallons over the weekend from the rain, and we're only built to sustain 6 million gallons. So that water is getting in somewhere. We're trying to figure out where that water is getting in.
Is that why there's sometimes a funny smell on Cliff in Maine?
I haven't noticed the funny smell at Cliff in Maine. I don't know. I'll keep an eye out for it. I mean, the water didn't seem to be stagnant. We also have garbage cans there. There's a bus stop. Maybe somebody dumped something.
It's definitely a sulfur smell that comes around that spot sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's been an issue for years, though, at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At Maine and Cliff.
Hey, you got me interested now.
Yeah. Outside of Lux Optique and the bus stop.
Because I don't think it would be a stormwater issue.
No.
But I said, you got me interested.
Could be a manhole.
Yeah. Anything else on asphalt milling? Okay. Leaf blower, it says we're going to postpone again. Is that all right?
Yeah, because Dan's not here.
Okay. And then you've got some amendments to the general fund budget.
Yeah, so we have 2 amendments to our general fund. The first is to transfer $6,000 from our contingency to fire training. We hired 2 fire officers about a month and a half ago who are now in the academy. We had only planned to have 1 in the academy, so we used up we had enough at that time to send them to the academy, but we used up all of the funding that we had available. So this replenishes the fire training program so that lieutenants and fire officers can go and get additional trainings. The second issue we have is to move $9,000 from our contingency fund to the highway department's purchase of equipment line. This is for a pedestrian activated crossing signal between the Elks Club and Sargent School. This had come through the Traffic Safety Committee that there were children at the school after hours and they were crossing when there wasn't a crossing guard there anymore. So these are those units that you press the button and it flashes so that you really can't miss it right at the crosswalk. And then it goes for 20 seconds or 30 seconds for someone to cross. We don't generally put these in, but in this case, we kind of threaded the needle because it's a high volume, kind of high speed area with a school crossing. So we thought if there's anywhere for one of these to be installed, and you have a similar one installed at the River Ridge townhouses that the developer had it put in. So this will be similar.
Yeah, it's super easy to build up speed even without intending to, especially as you head towards Cold Spring past that stretch. So I think, even during when there's crossing, the ability just to have that extra reminder for drivers, I think is great.
Yeah. All right, just in time.
I was waiting outside.
So that's the item for the budget. Everybody okay with that?
I'm good.
All right.
Oh, I have actually a request, Chris, because last year we talked a lot about police overtime. We had a bunch of items towards that, and so nothing anytime soon, but maybe when you talk about the capital plan or sometimes sort of this coming summer, I think just to get an update on where we are with that. It sounds like we're not having the need for that, and so I think that's something I'd like the public to be aware of, as it came up a number of times last year.
Yeah, as of the end of April, we were doing very well. We were tracking ahead of our budget, so we were below our budget that we should be at for this time of year for police overtime. And we've been pretty selective about what we attribute the overtime to. There's some things we can't help, like when we had the call at Roundabout, that was a lot of overtime. But we were 5% ahead of the budget. So I think we were a quarter through it's actually at the end of March, we were a quarter through the year and only 20% through the budget. And then I'll get updated numbers when we, probably at the end of May, I'll get updated numbers.
That'd be great, thanks.
Yeah, but we review it, the chief and I review it weekly. We do a weekly meeting and go over what we're going to choose to use the overtime for on the things that are discretionary. And he's been doing a great job holding the line on it. All right.
So I'm appreciative on that, because usually the main thing that we can do on overtime is just fill positions, right? And, I think we're just going to keep going at that.
And that's already helped. We are now above minimum shift for a number of our shifts, so when somebody calls out, we don't just have to go to overtime. So, and it's also allowed us to have a bike patrol back, so you'll see Ryan Sambles, who was in here earlier, biking around town now. So,
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, and they enjoy it too. They're having fun doing it. Actually, we did the same with the fire shifts as well, so we have one extra there, and that also will affect overtime. I think that's just the right approach. I will say, I don't think I recall a city administrator managing overtime with the chief carefully, so I'm glad you're doing that. Right.
Thanks.
Do we want to pick up item 9 and then come back to 1? All right. So item 9 is new. There's a resolution urging the state to pass a right to counsel for all. And Justice, will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sorry, I just added this to the agenda today. But as we're talking about affordable housing and continuing this discussion, a lot of where our focus has been around building new housing and focusing on the supply, and that's important, that's great. But I also wanted to make sure that preserving our the people that live here now and doing what we can to protect tenants, and we've done a lot already, but continuing to keep an eye toward our tenants, our renters, our homeowners, et cetera, the people that are living here. I wanted to do that, so I was trying to wrap my head around what we could do, and there's this bill in the assembly and in the legislature that is a right to counsel for all. And I was like, well, we can't implement that locally, but we can pass this resolution to encourage the Senate and Assembly to pass that. And what that does is that provides legal protections, or not legal protections, I'm sorry. It provides legal counsel for anyone facing evictions in the state. And as a council, we had already passed, or we signed a contract with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, and so we have a paralegal on standby that can help assist qualifying residents in the city when they're going through eviction proceedings, but it's not legal representation and not everybody qualifies. So this would help expand the net of those who have legal access to legal services during an eviction case, as well as expand the services that are provided, not just in Beacon, but to residents statewide. And I thought it would be a good thing for us as a council to nudge the state to move forward with. And the reason I brought this up so quickly is because session is ending in less than 40 days. And so I want to nudge them to move as quickly as possible.
Okay. Comments?
I think this resolution is great. I know that our arrangement with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley has helped quite a lot of people, and I've spoken to people in other municipalities who really admire the fact that the city has made that commitment. I think it's really important, and so I'm definitely supportive of this resolution.
I'll add that I think this has come up before our state legislature in previous years as well, and so it's good to continue, to the people who are continuing to ask for it, and so having support behind it is a good next step. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is it was sort of late, which I think is fine, because I think we're all saying that's okay. But I will ask, I'd like an opportunity to review it and also to just check on a couple of things. And so absent any objections, are we okay with putting that on for the next council meeting? Okay. I don't suspect there'll be any, but I'm just trying to do it the same way that we would do for everyone, right?
Yeah, in general, that's the way I would prefer to do it as well.
Exactly.
I was just like, oh, this is time sensitive.
Yeah.
But thank you for entertaining and supporting this anyway.
Yeah, one of the questions I had is that I know that there was sort of a shift in what exactly our agreement with Legal Services is. I know when we first had a singular contract with them, it was to hire a paralegal that would help with Beacon, but since they shifted to, I think, a grant,
Yeah.
I forget if it was a state or a federal grant, I'm just not sure. I know anecdotally there's a different woman whose number seems to keep coming up.
Yeah, we have the new person's number on the new flyer outside.
Okay. Is that Yolanda?
I don't know. I know that Stephen Mahalik, who was doing it previously, was moved to a different portfolio.
Yeah.
And I know that it's not just for Beacon anymore, because they got a federal and state grant that could help them expand it Hudson Valley wide.
So I don't know if that whereas would need to be adjusted to just tweak the accuracy of it, but regardless, I think the spirit of it is great.
All
That's
right.
correct.
So let's see if that makes, has council had a chance to look at this?
I have not, but
All
we'll
right.
do so tomorrow.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. That should also be a step. So take a look at that. Let's make sure we're okay. I see the assembly member is a co-sponsor. I may just check in with their office, because it just helps me understand, you know, is there something else out there? Is there a better one? Is there a less whatever one? The other area that's really important that the state is partially funding but not fully funding is rent support that's means tested, meaning income-based rent support. And I know they're doing part of that funding in the budget. I'm hoping they'll do more, but I think that's a very appropriate approach to the problem, because it's providing funding where it's tested by people who actually have the need, right? So I think that's important too. That's all I got.
I just want to add that there are actual landlords and housing providers who are signing on in support of this as well. So I think it's just noteworthy to know that, you know, organizations like CAMBA and Lenox Hill Neighborhood Houses, they have a lot of tenants, but they still see this legislation as beneficial.
So one more note, I would add under the be it further resolved that we send copies also to the speakers of the House and Assembly.
Yeah, I may ask the assembly member if they had any problem with that, right? I don't think they should, but,
I mean, he's a supporter of the bill.
yeah, I know. But, you know, maybe they want to present it or something or other,
Right.
right? But I'll check. Cool. Anything else?
And our state senators, Rolison. Not Susurino.
That's my bad.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, let's get that right.
And we'll correct Jacobson's last name, which has an E-N in it at one point. So we did it fast.
We did it really fast.
All right.
And besides, you find spelling errors in my minutes all the time.
Yeah, you got Jacobson 2 different ways. All right, we'll get there. So I will ask the city attorney to get a good look at this, and in addition to the comments that you heard.
Yes.
All right, and that would be great. Okay? And if I have any issues, I'll let you know within a day or so, but I don't suspect there will be anything. Okay? Everyone good? All right, so let's go back up to item 1, which is our affordable housing discussion. We have both John Clark on Zoom, and we have Nick Ward-Willis in person. How did the two of you want to work this?
I guess I'll start, and then John, please fill in. We've had a number of discussions with the council based on John's recommendations and a little overview of ways to increase affordable housing. The council has been looking at that. And one of those items is the city's existing senior affordable housing overlay district. The thought was, rather than reinvent the wheel, let's go for some of the more readily implementable solutions. And so John identified senior affordable housing overlay district as one area that could be modified and would allow more affordable housing opportunities to be constructed. So the senior affordable housing overlay district is what's called a floating zone. It's a district that exists on paper, but it has not yet been applied to any of the properties. And the way this zone came about was in 2012, there was an interest to create such a district and encourage it, but it was limited in its use to buildings that are 50 years or older, and it was the Highland Hospital that took advantage of this. And so they came before the city council, made their presentation, explained why they thought that building could be adaptively reused for senior affordable housing, and the city council then applied that zoning, in essence, took that overlay zone that was floating around the city and applied it to this property, issued a special permit, and then the applicant went to the planning board. And that was a several months-long process, as you had 2 actions before the city council that required public hearings, the application of the overlay district, and then the issuance of the special permit. And you had component of SECRA there, so it bounced back and forth before the planning board. And then once the city council applied the zoning and issued a special permit, it went to the planning board. So
Nick, about when did this occur?
2012 was when it was adopted, and so likely then applied in 2013.
Got it, yeah, so it's on my gap year from the council, although that one was 6 years. Yeah, because when I look at this zoning, it's like, it's obviously tailored for this one property and nothing else,
Yes.
right? And so even if we want to apply the concept, I think we need to review each of the elements. And I'm interested, and you'll get to it, I'm sure, whether we should be doing this as some sort of an overlay or whether we might just apply it citywide regardless.
That's correct. And since 2012, there has been no other applications, just the one, the Highland Meadows.
Yep.
And so, again, these would be affordable units restricted to seniors. So what we've prepared is the decision tree that we've used in the past to help our office draft legislation that reflects what your wishes are. And then the next step would be, if you want to proceed with, and you answer all the questions and you decide you still want to proceed, we'd then come back to the council with the actual legislation, and there'd be some more fine tuning done, but at least this gives our office the guidance that we would need. So one of the first questions we have is, in what zoning district should the senior affordable housing development be permitted? And then we have a discussion, what the mayor was mentioning, it's an overlay zoning district, which means it's not presently applied to the property, a property owner needs to apply. And does the city wish to consider making it apply as a permitted use within certain districts? And John Clark and I had spoken about this, because the overlay district means they've got to come to the city council and get it applied. If it were already permitted in certain zoning districts, then they would not have to come to the city council. It would be a permitted use, and they could go in theory to the planning board. And so, John, do you want to take over here and talk about your thoughts on which districts would be appropriate and where we would not suggest it be applied?
When I looked at the code and the various districts, the only 2 that I thought that it wouldn't be appropriate for would be the Waterfront Park District, which essentially has no uses other than parks and a little potential retail, and the heavy industrial district, where you might want to maintain that for job creation and specific heavy industrial type uses. There's limited land in heavy industrial. So other than that, the other one that came up for discussion, and I don't see why you would preclude it, but Fishkill Creek Development District. There's certain sensitivities along the creek. Maybe you want to think about that separately. But other than those two districts, I thought it could apply anywhere. And then the question becomes, if that's acceptable, you exclude it for those 2 or maybe 3 districts and allow it everywhere else. Do you do it as of right, or do you do it by an overlay district where it needs that extra step? And it ends up being 2 extra steps, because the council generally refers seeker to the planning board, and so it goes for application to the city council, gets referred to seeker for the analysis on environmental issues, then it goes back to the council for a vote on the concept plan, and then it goes back in rezoning, and then it goes back to the planning for site plan. So it does involve a lot of juggling back and forth, which takes a lot of time. And if you're interested in affordable housing, maybe you don't want to put every applicant through the ringer like that.
John, we'd also discussed, before we open up to discussion, putting a acreage limitation. And you had suggested on properties larger than half an acre.
Yeah, there was some concern, I think, in our last discussion about the R1 districts, whether you'd want this in residential neighborhoods or on small parcels, really, house conversions, those sorts of opportunities. So we thought, if you put an acreage limit on it, a minimum acreage of a half acre or something similar, then it wouldn't end up being in the, residential small lot neighborhoods, and tend to be on larger scale lots. And I pointed out a few of those at the last meeting, sort of 1, 2, 3 acre lots were examples.
Yeah, before we start, I just want to talk kind of broadly. There was a long time where my thinking on zoning was pointing Beacon zoning to the 21st century, as opposed to kind of the old 60s zoning. And there was, things like historic preservation, form-based zoning, things like that, which were really important. And then the last several years, as we got, in demand again, where Beacon was sort of, back in popularity, my thinking on zoning was to expect more from development. So for instance, we altered the 4th floor to require a public benefit. Now I'm starting to think again, because of the housing shortage and the governor's proposals on building new housing, and seeing that happen nationally in urban areas that have become popular again, I'm trying to think through how does those pieces work. And the way I'm approaching this one is I'm starting to think about, are there ways that we can encourage construction and a little bit of density as a result in ways that fit, right, as opposed to object. And I like the concept of senior housing being more by right. I like the limitation of, but if the lots are small, that's probably going to be intrusive. So I like the limit, to like minimum half acre before you would have that as an option. But I'd like to talk through, what people think about it. But my first reaction is, this is the kind of thing where we might want to be permitting things more than we have in the past, in light of that need for a lot of construction. I know we're not going to fix the region's problems all by ourselves, but those are the kinds of things I'm kind of leaning toward now and want to learn more about.
Hey, John, have you found in other municipalities that have enacted such an overlay? And if so, how successful have they been?
I didn't actually do any research on that because we already had it in place. So it wasn't like adopting a new law. It was making the existing law more flexible. If you want, I can, off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but I know there's affordable housing zoning overlays. The town of Rhinebeck here has an affordable housing overlay district.
Has that triggered any development of affordable housing that you're aware of?
There's a proposal actually by Ken Carney the town board did the rezoning, I think, in the last couple years, and Ken Carney has come forward with an 80-unit development proposal, which has been in limbo for a few months, and I'm not sure why. I think some people on the Planning Board and Conservation Advisory Committee in the town were critical of the proposal, the layout, and that sort of thing. So they're going back and, I think, maybe redesigning it. But yes, there's been interest. It was landed by the town board, mapped, and now there's a developer who's interested in an 80-unit project, which is affordable, not senior.
I'm interested, actually, I don't know what you're about to say, because what I'm about to say is what you said last week, which is that I'm looking at these proposals. I'm interested in all of these proposals, I think, but I want to see if we can't refocus this conversation on a point that Ren brought up a few weeks ago, which is that the recommendations from the county's housing study was not just that we need to build more units, but that we need to be building or creating more housing for people who make, I believe it's $50,000 or less a year, which is, for our region, 50% AMI. It is still well above what you can afford if you make minimum wage. And there is still a strong gap between that income level and the Section 8 housing vouchers. And I'm not totally clear in looking at these proposals how that need overlays on what we're sort of discussing now.
So that one, can I suggest we pick that up as a separate issue? Because one of the things we'd have to do that is we'd have to pull up the county study and take a look at what it says. I don't think we're prepared to do that tonight. We're kind of looking at the senior one first, if that's okay.
Well, if we're giving up the senior one, that, you know, if we're saying we don't need, council doesn't need to look at the senior, could we say if it meets these certain criteria? Another thing that came up was there would be a transportation plan in place if it was in one of those remote areas that we talked about.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I'm just trying to keep the one topic. We'll get to other ones, but I think fitting into, well, let's talk the senior one now, and we'll pick up the other ones, you know, along the way. I think those are relevant points, so.
I guess it's just not clear to me that the senior one would be my first priority.
Okay.
If you look at the memo that was prepared, there's 9 questions that would need decision points from the council. And the last one, 9, is the level of percentage of AMI that would be part of the program. So you could certainly put in a lower, it's 100% now, you could go down to much lower as part of your criteria. So that could be built into the senior housing component as well.
So I think the single largest growing group in the country in terms of housing needs is seniors, if I'm not mistaken. If we have to collect data on it, I'm happy to.
No,
but I think that's a significant issue.
It was pointed out in the housing study that seniors are in particular need of housing. That's very true. I'm just, again, am more interested, I think, in an affordable housing overlay that would also prioritize seniors within a broader plan, but that is more focused on income levels than necessarily a particular age group. Particularly, I think, because I am interested in seeing intergenerational households.
Oh, what do you mean by that term? Just defined for the audience, right?
Intergenerational households, just that, we don't want to have any particular, or I don't want to see, and I have heard from other constituents that we don't want to see any particular demographic, be that age or income, really existing in homogeneously in any one housing unit.
Okay. So if we want to pick up the issue of groups that have affordability issues. I think it's important that we review our data on the subject, including what we already provide and what other communities in the county provide for different income levels. Because my understanding of the study, which would be consistent with, I think, my experience over the years, is that the two communities in the county that are provided the most in terms of the most affordable housing to the lowest groups in terms of income levels has been the two cities. And so I would be very cautious about how far we go down the path by first understanding what are the needs for the county-wide and what are the communities doing. I don't mind us doing more than our fair share, but having been in Beacon for 30-plus years and seeing our downside as a very, very difficult one to come out of, I just want to be cautious about how we do that. So I would like it to be data-based and like us to develop the data to have that discussion appropriately.
I'm curious what Ren thinks.
I mean, I think we're close to, I think John's point is a good one, that, you know, these criteria, it's letter F, you know, that's kind of where it is right there. And if the council is both wanting to revise the senior affordable housing overlay district to make it more accessible to developers so that they don't have to come back and check with us. But we say now, yes, we can do that. We like that idea of it going straight to the planning board, but we want to keep it at 100% AMI. You know, those are just the kind of the details that we could hash out among us. And I think I hear, Paloma, you would probably want to keep it at 100% AMI instead of lowering it to 80. But we might all have a different, you know, kind of idea about A through F or A through G.
If I'm reading it right, I want it lower than 80. But maybe I'm not reading this correctly. I'm looking at housing
I'm sorry.
for
Yes.
Yeah,
You're right.
I'm looking for housing for people who make 50% of AMI. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me suggest we try to go through the senior one first. I was kind of hoping this would be an exercise that would give us kind of exposure to all of the different ideas, because a number of them are in here, and that we would have kind of a discussion that would help form this one, but would also form kind of the basis for subsequent discussions, because this one covers a lot of the bases. That's kind of why I just said, you know, what do you all think we should go forward? And the suggestion from John was this one, just because, you know, it covers a lot of ground, right? And it doesn't mean we can't apply it to other things. I think it's just helping us form that conversation along the way.
How much work would it be to adapt, if we're going through the process of reviewing housing overlay, to just create it as just an affordable housing overlay? It seems that there are templates for that. Maybe I shouldn't say template, but examples of that in other municipalities. And because I think you're right, Lee, that it's helpful in that it makes us get specific about what exactly we're looking for on all of these criteria levels. I just, again, am more interested in broader demographics, if we can.
So creating an affordable overlay district, it's not difficult. It's just a matter of determining what your criteria is, and then it would be similar to the senior housing overlay district. Difficulty is that you'd have to come back to the city council and apply it each time. In terms of, from a developer's perspective, that adds cost and time by making it an overlay district, as opposed to being a permitted use within the district.
So if we replace what John is suggesting and just eliminate the senior part of it and have simplify the process for all affordable housing, same scale, same acreage size, and same limitations, it seems like the conversation could be more encompassing.
I defer part to John on that. Part of the, I think, interest in the senior affordable is that it creates set category of households who can apply to that, so, because you can base it limited on age. And they would then have that, it would be more of a segment for them so that you would be meeting their needs. So you could have both an affordable and a senior affordable. I think there is still a need for a senior affordable based upon your county data study.
Yes, but again, to Councilmember Wake's point, it's not there. It's mainly focused on income. You know, that's what we're mainly seeing in that study. And it seems like you know, if I were a developer, I would say I could get more bang for my buck not doing senior necessarily or solely senior, because you wouldn't have as many H-line or handicap accessible apartments that you would need to build. So it could it's an interesting idea, I think, to just.
One of the reasons seniors housing is sort of encouraged is because it then encourages or provides seniors the ability to move out of a house, which then frees up a housing stock for a family to move into. And so that you then have, you know, one or two people living in a 3-bedroom house now going into a senior housing, and that frees that up for families to move into.
Would removing the senior part of this and just having it be a housing, affordable housing overlay, impact a developer's ability to just create senior housing within that overlay that's affordable?
You would still, I think, want to create the component that allows them to have the age discrimination, right? Because you can't discriminate in housing, except age discrimination is one that is permitted, so you can have specifically housing that is limited to people who are anywhere from 55 or older. You can set what that range is. And so I think if you want to encourage it, you might want to have a separate category for age-restricted housing. And that also opens up, as I understand it, to grant money as well, as that then subsidizes that cost so that it makes it more readily available.
So developers wouldn't be able to develop senior housing, specific senior housing in an affordable housing overlay if it's not specifically a senior housing, affordable housing overlay?
No, to your specific question, no, I think they could. If you had affordable housing, they could then come in to make it senior affordable housing within the larger umbrella.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
So here's where I'm sitting. As I said earlier, I'm looking for ways of opening up zoning in as broad an area of the city as possible. And one of my reactions listening to, well, will we do seniors or will we just do any affordable, is I have a feeling that we would conclude that the affordable overlay would be in more limited areas. And I'm thinking specifically about I'm looking at the chart that, the map that John has done of what are our R1 districts in the city. And something like 80% of our land is in R1. And there's a compatibility issue, right? Because if you're doing an overlay, you have to come and get an approval that there's a fit area here. And again, just as we work our way through our single-family neighborhoods, what kinds of uses do we think are compatible that we think we'll find community support for? And my 2 cents was that the senior piece, I thought, had the broadest applicability in terms of where we might apply it in the city. And I'm not so sure that a pure affordable would get quite the same reaction in all the neighborhoods. It's not that we couldn't do it, but then you'd have to see how neighborhoods would adjust, or how it would work. I live in a very diverse neighborhood, but I'm just looking at some of the streets that are more single family. I think they may struggle even with a senior approach. I think that they would struggle with a 2-family zoning as opposed to a 1-family zoning in those areas. So I just think that's why I'm sort of picking one where I thought maybe we could get broader applicability. If we are going to pick on affordable as opposed to senior, I think it just will be a much narrower location-wise in the city. That would be my guess.
Why would there be a different public reaction between senior and just regular affordable?
Well, so let's just kind of work your way through it. So let's say you've got a half-acre site, and you put, I don't know, pick a number, 6 affordable 6 senior units. There are likely to be either 1 or 2 people in each of those, right? Because it's limited to seniors. You're likely to have fewer cars, right? So it seemed to me that the impact on the neighborhood with a senior 6 units in what would be a single-family, otherwise single-family home would be less than if you had 6 affordable, there were families, for instance, or there were variations of age and more vehicles, right? That, I think, would come out. And I'm just not sure that we would find community support for that as much as we would for the senior one. I'm just trying to be real about, what are the impacts in the neighborhood?
I mean, I think it could also work as people that can't even afford to have a car can now afford to live in the neighborhood as well. And it could be single people like myself who make less than $50,000 a year that are renters that would fit well into a neighborhood. I think it could go either way.
Other thoughts?
John, did you check with the nonprofit landlords you were going to circle back with about this proposal? I think you were going to.
I only talked to Peg O'Leary from Community Services in Wapaneers Falls, who did Meadow Ridge and Highland Meadows. She was very interested in this, but she was interested in larger parcels, not small. Her forte is larger projects with seniors. And so she was very interested in it. She said, find me a parcel and I'll work with Beacon and get it done. But she would want a larger parcel and streamlined process. That's what she was looking for. But I assume that if you opened it up to smaller parcels, there might be smaller scale developers, builders, who also might be interested in doing it, especially if it wasn't, say, 100% affordable, but a mix, just like you can have intergenerational, you can have mixed income tenants. So the thing about the senior affordable is that it's already on the books, and it is, generally speaking, more acceptable in residential neighborhoods to have senior multifamily than it is to have non-senior multifamily because of traffic noise, kids, whatever. Right now you have, like the mayor was saying, 80-90% of the city is restricted to single family. Seniors might be acceptable in those senior family neighborhoods because of their characteristics, but affordable housing of a general type might not. Right now, you don't even allow two-family homes in those districts, let alone affordable housing of multifamily units. So we were asked to look at sort of the easy things that could be done relatively efficiently and quickly so that you get a marker on the board and open up the idea of having a more mixed housing type in the residential neighborhoods. And so we thought senior was the way to go because it's already there. It just needs some flexibility in the existing law that could be done relatively quickly. And I would be not against an affordable housing overlay zone. It would be, I think, a longer process and a bigger lift in terms of providing that flexibility as to where it could go in the city.
Who would, whether it were affordable or limited to senior, who would, on smaller lots, who would monitor these? Would it be the, who determines qualifications and year after year doing inspections on that? Because I suspect that, on a bigger scale, when there's 50 or 60 units, it's going to be a lot different than when there's 2 or 4 units.
That's a good point.
I mean, it depends. Like the one we're looking at Cross Street, their NISHIP contract is monitored by DOH, I think. So it would depend on what their funding, how their project comes together. But it sounds like, if I understand the developer that John is mentioning, if I understand that model, I don't think that there is, I don't think that there's a state body that would monitor. Do you know, Lee?
This is on Cross Street.
No, the PAP.
Peg O'Leary.
So I think they do the monitor. They run the program.
But I mean, I don't think that they have state funding other than their tax credit investors. I'm not sure that there would be any state agency monitoring.
Yeah, but
I think they do get subsidized by the state on all those projects.
Like SHPO,
Oh,
not SHPO,
NISHIP?
the HCR, I think.
Oh, it's HCR. Yeah, of course. That's right. That's right.
yeah, George, though, you bring up the point of if we wanted to do something like half an acre, and we had some program like that, one, there's the issue of, can a builder afford to build with that few acres, right? Because you need enough units to support the affordable component. Now you raise the second question is, well, might it also be too small to administer, right? Because once you get the housing, you're going to have to administer to ensure that it stays that way. That's a pretty good argument that maybe half acre is the wrong size, and I'm just learning as we discuss,
Then
right?
we have to, the city has to administer to make sure the administration is continuing.
Yeah.
Well, aren't our workforce development units currently managed by Hudson River Housing? And those are sometimes only a couple units per building, but because it's an agency that monitors multiple buildings in the city, that makes it, I don't know, worth it for them. I don't know if worth it's the right word, but they have the built-in administrative backbone.
They have, the economies of scale to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have to, I think that's a good point, because I just want us to make sure that we're doing something that actually works, because there's no point in legislating, nothing's going to happen, right?
And in terms of the, in terms of the units themselves being up to code and regulated, that's up to our building department, correct? They manage all of
Yeah.
our Section 8,
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter how many, it's unit by unit, it's not building by building what they do.
I would just add that I'm not already familiar with where the half-acre lots are around Beacon, so I'd kind of want to get a sense of what areas we're actually talking about when we're talking about where we want to, either through permit use or through an overlay district, open this possibility.
Yeah, John, is that a map that you happen to have already processed at some point of sort of highlighting which lots are more than an acre and less than an acre?
I don't have that generated. I did look at the parcel access today, just sort of skimming around the city to where half-acre lots and over were. And there's not that many in the R1 districts, but there are a few, and they're scattered. They're just sort of here and there. And, maybe getting back to the original question, in terms of an overlay or as of right, you could make it as of right in certain districts and, go to the council for lots in the R1 district, for instance, where it might be more sensitive. So if a developer wants to do something like this in a GB or an LI district, there probably won't be that much neighborhood concern. But if it's on a residential street and it just happens to be that sort of one big lot that's left, that Highlands Place subdivision was an acre lot that was in the middle of a lot of smaller lots. And that generated a lot of concerns. I could put together a map for you of half acre and up or one acre and up. But there's ways to deal with that too. You could retain the right to rezone or not to rezone, depending on what type of street it was on. And so therefore, something in the middle of a lot of small lots would not get the council's favor, and something that was in a GB district or a LI district or in a more Main Street sort of transitional district would be as of right and could go through without the extra level of review.
Could we do something like if they have sidewalks already in place that connect to a main street? Or is that, I don't know if that's, I'm just spitballing here.
No, I mean, I think that's part of what we talked about at the last meeting, right? Transportation, sidewalks come into that as well.
Or if it's, on a current bus route or not.
Mm-hmm.
John, you did an example you just raised of a larger lot, so let's play that a bit. So you said there's a 1 acre lot. Actually, it just was in the planning board, right?
Right.
And the zoning for that 1 acre lot was, would have permitted 5 homes, right? So,
Yes, but they came down to 4.
yeah, I understand. So if we were to do something like this, in order to get an outcome that actually someone built, you'd have to do something like 10 or more units on that lot?
Yes, but
Right.
they would be obviously attached as opposed to single-family lots with setbacks.
Right, but it would have to be done in such a way that, whatever the construction cost, because it's, several $100,000 to build a unit now, from looking at what I'm seeing on other projects, to be able to afford that, the builder, and depending on the AMI, the lower the AMI, the more support that you're going to need to do it. Because if you say whatever the rent is, if it's cut in half, it's like, and how do you build? Right, so we're not going to get anywhere. So what do you think the number would have to be? Would it have to be something like 10? Would it have to be something like 20, John, in a lot like that to make work? And I know you don't know those numbers. I think that's one of the things we'll have to learn, but I'm just wondering what you think the ballpark is.
Yeah, well, when we did the memo here, it looked at both the minimum number and the AMI and the units per acre. All those things are built into this memo and decision tree. So we could go down that, try to go back down that list and see if step by step you can make those decisions. For instance, for a half-acre lot, based on the couple of units per acre that were thrown out in this decision tree, the minimum would be 8 units for a half-acre lot, and the maximum would be 14 units. So in that range, 8 to 14 units on a half-acre lot.
Well, and I think that, Lee, with the lower AMI, then it doesn't necessarily make it prohibitive, like you're saying. It opens it up to certain nonprofit developers as well.
Only if they have subsidies, right?
Right,
Right, so,
right, if they have, funding.
yeah.
Mhm.
I'm just listening to the numbers, and it's just like, I'm not sure how much support we would have for numbers like that in a single-family neighborhood. So I think we can just, that's why I'm asking. I'm just trying to learn, right? Because I don't think, and I'm the one interested in applying it as broadly as possible. I'm just trying to hear what it means in a neighborhood and wondering, how particular residents would respond to a proposal like that. And it's, I think it will be concerning of folks.
But again, seniors would be the least concerning of any housing type.
Fair.
Generally speaking, that's what you would find across the board. And they would
Yeah.
potentially need the least amount of subsidy, because there's a lot of seniors who are looking to downsize and have equity. So you can get affordable housing as well as market rate housing within this district, because there's a need for a demographic that is not being supplied with options when they have an empty nest household.
Yeah, and certainly one of the ways to make the numbers work is not to require that they all be at a particular level, but a range, and that would kind of also support, that when that gives you kind of a net higher rent, then you might be able to support it without programs, right?
And that was the idea,
Yep.
is to open this up and make it as flexible as possible. If you, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this, but if you target it for affordable housing at 50% below median income, you're making it very inflexible because you're focusing on one targeted group as opposed to a larger range of options. Dan had an interesting idea, I thought, when he said, have an average of 70% AMI, so that the developers can put in some 50, some 60, some 80, some 100. And that way you get a mix of incomes, but the average is set at a certain level that focuses farther down the income scale.
Yeah, it was $50,000 or less. So 50 average, a mix would accomplish that goal. I don't know.
Only if they get built.
Sure.
Wow. So I just did the math. So $50,000 is about $4,000 a month. That's $48,000 a year. And I think the way the AMI would work, you take 30% of that $4,000, right? Mm-hmm. And that puts you at $1,200 as maximum rent. And you can't build anything at that rate without the subsidy. I don't see how that works, right?
Well, that's what Peg O'Leary's done, right?
Right.
That's what hers are 3 bedrooms at $1,500 a month or something like that. I'm just guessing, but I looked at some point and it was something around there. It's deeply affordable for families.
Right. We just have to understand the funding model, right? Which is, it has to be a state program. There isn't going to be anything else, I don't think.
Right. But, we have a state that's generously funded and, well, sort of divided on the housing issue, actually. But there are programs out there. But I hear what you're saying is that, to make it happen, you want to reduce the barriers.
Right.
But then, if you reduce the barriers and they make it happen, then that's where, the voices of our neighbors who don't really want to see that happen come in. And I think that I don't think Dan would mind me reiterating again, that if it's very affordable and it's solving the issue that there's no housing for people who are renting and earning below $50,000 a year, then many of us would be quite happy to see more density. But if it's not that, then we'd rather just see the meadow, stay the meadow. So there's that in our community as well, right? There are people who don't want to see any density at all, but there are some people who want to see more density if it's keeping Beacon affordable.
I know there's people too.
I think the reality of the housing shortage is all housing is good. And, if we especially want to maintain our tax base and other things, I think we need a mix of housing. And to simply say no to anything except, affordable at the 50 AMI level is basically inviting kind of fiscal difficulties. And I just think we need to be careful. It's taken us a long, long time to get Beacon to its financial situation. A lot of it has to do with the new construction and the part of the tax base that came with it. And I just think we need to be cautious about saying the only kind of housing that we want is, workforce housing or housing at an AMI that doesn't necessarily support the tax base. I think you need a mix.
I don't disagree with you. I just don't want to lose the opportunity to do both.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that, right? But I just think we need to be very cautious and to say, I'm only going to take this and I refuse this. I think we're just inviting fiscal difficulty.
Yeah, what I think that I'm trying to propose here is a both and. I do think it needs to be a mix. I don't think an affordable overlay means that the only things that can ever be built in Beacon are 50% AMI. I think that what I'm trying to gear and head this conversation towards is prioritizing 50% AMI. And I'm just trying to think through and talk through with you all what exactly that looks like. and how can we get there, because that's where the county has said our need is, and the data so far has said our need is.
So can I suggest a next step is that we review the county study collectively at a meeting, and we can use that for discussion on what gaps we might have identified. Because I think not everyone is familiar with that, and I think we should just take a look at those numbers. Is that all right? Everybody good with that?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think that we should definitely have the county study on next workshop's agenda, but John did also mention a decision tree to go through for an affordable housing overlay, and I would love to just explore that and see what that might look like.
Yeah, and we've got that. We can do that, right?
Yes, yes. So again, it's like a yes and, both and.
Exactly. Right, because I know we focused a lot on the AMI piece and senior versus affordable in general, but there's other pieces of that puzzle.
Yeah.
And that's on the table that we can go through, so.
Yes,
Are
if
we
you
okay
think,
with
if
that?
you think this we're going to feel like, we haven't even talked about parking yet.
Exactly. I think that's the easy one, but we'll see.
I don't know, I don't think this was covered in the housing study, but I am recognizing that we are also talking a lot about the particulars of financing. And I don't know if it would be helpful to get a perspective. I know that we got some information about inclusionary zoning broadly. I forget from his name was, but I don't know if it would be helpful, Doug, if it would be helpful to have that be a part of our next discussion as well.
Okay. Yeah, I had a phone call, follow-up with Doug. I have an email I can forward that summarized it. Maybe we can get him to attend as well. But I think CPC has a vast amount of knowledge in this space and has done a lot of good work. So happy to. And I'll fish out the email.
Yeah, I just don't want us to get stopped by the need for state funding to make things happen, if state funding's on the table, for example. But understanding all of those elements, I think, will help us understand what is, what's the best option for us.
Okay. Justice kind of asked that we come back to the items on the table, so maybe we could do that. Is that all right?
Sure. So the first two really dealt about the permitting process, which I think we've discussed, whether you want a special permit, whether you want it to be an overlay. As I understand, I don't think you're ready to tackle that question. The sense I get is that you're interested in exploring that, knowing that the underlying zoning has certain protections within it that the planning board would apply and be mandatory, is sort of my understanding. The third question we had was about age restriction. Did you want to reduce it from the current code of 62 to something less? I don't know that you need to dwell too much on that tonight, given where we are and the additional discussions to be had. But if you want to make it more units and more broader base, then you would want to consider reducing it. And if you're doing age restriction, the lowest you can do under the federal law is 55. You're currently at 62.
So to the extent, this is my 2 cents, that we look at something senior, and we haven't said we will do that exclusively, I'd like it to be at the lower age group, because I think the mechanics would be that if someone is in Beacon, has family that has now grown up, now has, is an empty nester, being able to go to something smaller opens up other housing in the city. So I'd just as soon encourage that sooner rather than later. So I'd be okay with a lower age group.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
I would agree.
Okay. The next question we have goes to the density that you started to touch upon. And the second question that follows that is do you want to have a minimum number of units? So the first question is, do you wish to increase the density per acre from the current limitation? So for senior affordable, it's 4 units per gross area of lot size. And then our discussion point says, do you want to increase that to 17 units per acre, which is similar to the T district, the transitional district, or 29 units per acre, which is similar to the GB and the LI district? And so I think the first...
Sorry, can you give those numbers one more time? It's currently 4 per acre?
4 units per acre for the senior affordable housing overlay district. Transitional district would be 17 units per acre. And then the GB and LI district would be 29 units per acre. So I think
Where is this?
this is question number 4 in our decision tree memo.
All right, so my reaction, and again, I'll give other people time to consider it, I think we'd have to tailor it by the underlying zoning. In other words, if it were an R1 with, I don't know, quarter-acre zoning, and it was a 1 acre lot, that would be a lesser number than if it's in the T-zone, for instance, right? So that's my first reaction, just to give other people time to think about what you asked. I don't know exactly what numbers, but.
Right, could be a multiplier of what is the current permitted. You
Yeah.
just apply that across the board, so you have,
Yeah, something like
you
that.
give it a range.
Right, so what you mean by a multiplier is, let's say it's R110, so that's 10,000 square foot zoning, and suppose that's the zoning, and it's a 1 acre lot. So that would say, for that 1 acre lot, zoning would permit 4, and maybe the multiplier is 2, so then it becomes 8.
Right, correct,
Something like that is what you're suggesting is a possibility.
yes.
Okay.
And I don't know, does the council have the
I'm
memo?
not
We don't
seeing-
have
I'm-
that
I'm
memo.
sorry. I missed the last 60 seconds of what you said because I was trying to find this memo.
The memo, same.
You didn't want it in the packet.
Yeah, it was so late, I mean, we just looked at
Yeah,
it
so we
today,
didn't,
I did not know that, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Nick.
Yeah, no, my fault, so I'm referring to something that is really brilliant and great, so,
You're explaining
Sounds
fine, though.
amazing.
Clearly, you all didn't get the memo.
Can you just talk through, so what's the first, so we're talking about as you create this adjustment, what's
Yes.
number 1 in our decision tree?
well, number 1 was, did you want it to be an overlay zone, or did you want it to be a permitted use within the zone?
Okay.
And then the second one was, did you want it to be a special permit use, or just go straight for site plan approval? And my summary of a response to that is that I got the sense that the council was okay with removing those criteria and let it be a permitted use and not a special permit and only require site plan approval from the planning board if you felt that the zoning requirements were sufficient to accomplish the goals that you have, and that the planning board was given specific criteria that they would have to apply. So it's making sure that what you want, the AMI and everything, and some of the minimum unit sizes and items of that nature are reflected in the text of the zoning itself. So those first two were sort of where do you want it and what role do you want the city council to have? Because again, those all relate to affordability in terms of the cost of developers and giving a developer the sense that the city wants this and
Right.
here's the process. The third question was the question of age restriction, which is only specific to senior affordable housing. Law says you can restrict it to as young as 55. Current code says 62. And the relevant code section for the senior affordable housing overlay district is in the zoning, chapter 223, and then it's section 41.22. The fourth and fifth question relate to the density. The density being how many units do you want to allow, dwelling units do you want to allow? The concept is here you're trying to create affordable ones. The developer is going to be subsidizing that because they're going to be receiving less rent, so you would allow them to have more units. So currently in the senior affordable housing overlay district, it's 4 units per gross acre. And John and I had looked at some other zoning districts to see what is the current dwelling units permitted per acre. And in the T district, it's 17 dwelling units per acre. And in the GB and the LI district, it's 29 units per acre.
Right, and so the multiplier concept, because you asked to have it repeated, is it would depend on the zoning. So the example was an R110 zone, which would allow 4, that's 10,000 square feet,
Right.
so 100 by 100 foot lot. That would be 4 units per acre in an R110 zone. And the multiplier would say, well, R110, instead of 4 units an acre, it's 8 if the multiplier is 2, and it's 12 if the multiplier is 3, right? But in another zone, in R140, which is 1 house per acre, that same multiplier would be 3 instead of 12, right?
Right.
So, I think that might be a correct concept because, when you say something like 17 to an acre, and we're looking at streets of all single-family homes, I'm not sure you're going to find a lot of support or feeling that that's a fit, right?
Okay.
And I'm more than happy to revisit the housing plan. I mean, I was kind of steeped in it, so I don't feel like I don't know if everyone feels like you want to revisit the housing study, but I am very interested in Molly's idea about looking at what parcels we're actually talking about, like where it would be in the city.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the housing assessment, needs assessment is a broad document about a very diverse county. But what we're talking about here is what we want to do here.
Yeah, and I think it will also add reality to, you know, where exactly are we looking? Because in my head, the only open space that we have that's significant is where we've already built senior housing, right? Meaning by the Highland Hospital, by Hastings Drive. There may be opportunity for state land to open up, and again, that's kind of the only significant land that I know of. It's not, you know, directly adjacent to Main Street, but it is open land. So and it depends on our priorities and whether we can do a transportation plan or we can get the appropriate kind of access the right way. So.
And then the other question is, the current code for a senior affordable housing overlay district requires that a minimum of 20 dwelling units be constructed. So do you want to reduce that? And we've thrown in this decision tree. Do you want to keep it at a minimum of 20 dwelling units, 15, 10, or 6? Or some other number, of course. But if you want to encourage these, do you want to reduce the minimum number so that if someone thinks they can identify the right lot in the right zoning district and they can get 8 on it, why 20?
Yeah, it sounds like, sort of, to go back to 4 and 5, it should depend on the lot size and a couple other factors that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Could we circulate the memo also before we?
Yeah, we're going to do it again. I don't think this is the only conversation on this.
You're going to be quizzed on this, Ren.
I'm so nervous.
And I'm taking them out of order also. So.
Well, this is really good because it needs to be a very broad discussion at first. And it's going to take us a little while to kind of get our arms around where we think we want to head. And it's perfectly okay to be general for a while. I think it's just fine. Right?
So question 6 that you'll read at some point.
Yes.
Does the city wish to establish a minimum or maximum size of a dwelling unit? And then we've added a discussion there, right? The size of a dwelling unit impacts its affordability, and the smaller the unit size, the greater opportunity exists for additional units. Alternatively, smaller units may not be what the market is dictating, and similarly, a maximum unit size would ensure that the greatest number of units could be constructed per acre. So is the city council interested in regulating the minimum or maximum size of a dwelling unit? If so, what sizes? Or if not, just let the builder and the financing and the market dictate it?
I have a question about, because one of the effects of like the minimum unit size is what style of living we're talking about. And I'm just not totally clear if it would be part of this discussion or this overlay to discuss if we are interested in supporting different types of living situations, for example, rooming houses, or I think when John was proposing these micro units, that they might have a shared kitchen or, again, other styles of living situations.
Right, so dwelling unit definition of a dwelling unit is that it's all contained housekeeping, including a kitchen, so you would have to then modify the definition to allow for shared cooking facilities, because that would then not meet the definition of a dwelling unit.
Right, okay.
Question 7 is one you've all been waiting for.
One sec. On that one, you know, I have two views, and again, these are very preliminary. I think we're going to go through this more than once. One option would be to kind of not have any restriction on size, maximum or minimum. Another option would be to leave it to the planning board, you know, in deciding fit, to be able to set minimum or maximum. Right, because it may well be in you know, you're near Main Street and some kind of small unit makes a lot of sense. Where, you know, you're out in an area of single-family homes and small units would increase the unit count, and that might be viewed as not a fit.
Right.
kind of two views, right? One is not to have any, and the other one would be, well, not to have any, but allow the planning board to set them.
I kind of like the idea of letting the planning board have the say in it, because I feel like that's also the arm where the public has the most input, and just like, well, there's the most negotiating power with the public in that.
Yeah, because, yeah, our role will be public hearing on a law, but the actual application, right, is, yeah. And that's why I said part of our choices are about what we put in the zone and what we leave to the planning board. So I think that's one of our criteria to think through.
With that in mind, I don't want to get into today, but the first two things about how much is as of right versus not, I feel like a lot of the times when I listen to planning board discussion, it sounds like they sometimes feel they are restricted by, well, that's as of right, so if this fits, we have to allow it. We can't not allow it. And so, but it sounds like now we're talking about some things like we want to give them the power to take into account the dynamic of the neighborhood or even the block or the slope or whatever it is that impacts that, or the size of the street or something. And so I'm just curious from a legal perspective how we do that. Also, in a way, the planning board feels they can apply. I don't want to give them something they're like, I don't know what to do with this, so.
Yeah. You know, and there's two examples that have been in front of the planning board that we're probably all aware of. One is the subdivision of the 5 homes, and a lot of it was not fit so much as the ability it's the subdivision plan, and that's what the planning board was assessing. There's a different one that's in front of the planning board now, which is the Reformed Church down the street, and there it's a special use permit. And there the criteria is fit in the sense of fits with the neighborhood, right? And those are very different in terms of depending on how we set up the zone. Because the special use permit is, I forget the magic words, but fit is sort of the description of it.
Right, it's not an as-of-right use, but it's a use that is permitted if you meet certain criteria.
Right, it needs to be compatible with the other uses in the neighborhood, right?
And then you can have specific special permit uses for, there's a general.
Parking.
Right,
yeah.
right, and also for the use.
Yeah.
That would only apply to an affordable unit or a senior affordable unit,
Yeah.
maybe.
Right, that doesn't solve our problem, it's just giving us options to consider, right, as we're putting this together.
But I think one of the topics during the discussions, I think more towards the end as you start shaping this, is what flexibility does the planning board have, and also what's mandatory upon the planning board, so that you fit into those buckets. Because there are some things that you want and some things in which you want to give to the discretion. Okay, I've made a note of that so we can sort of work that in. The next one is, does the city council wish to lower parking requirements for a senior affordable housing project? Currently, for a senior affordable housing project, it's 1.2 spaces per dwelling unit. And John and I were discussing something, reducing it to 1 to 0.75 to 0.50, or let the planning board have the discretion to determine what it should be. Maybe if it's closer to Main Street, they would say nothing. Maybe if it's further out, they would want some parking available. So that's another discussion point.
Yeah.
And then, John, do you want to walk us through number 8 and 9?
All right. Yeah, 8 is the question. Right now, the senior affordable housing zone requires 100% of the units be designated as affordable. So it's only designed for projects that have large subsidies and are completely affordable. And it seems to me if we're going to make this more flexible, we would want to reduce that number of the percentage, so you might have a more privately subsidized project where you could have enough units, private units, market rate units to help subsidize the affordable ones. And that way you'd end up getting more projects in the pipeline. The way it is now, it was designed for a Peg O'Leary Community Services Program project, a large project with all seniors, all affordable. If we want to make it more flexible, maybe we reduce that number, that percentage of affordability to half of them, perhaps, or something like that, so that you might get more flexibility built in and attract more developers who have a different development model. And then the final one is the AMI question. Right now, it's 100% of AMI, which is pretty generous. It doesn't target the lower income people who are 50, 60% of median income. So the last one is what percentage of AMI you want to bring it down to. The affordable workforce housing provisions that we have on the books now are 70%. That seems to have worked well. It hasn't restricted the number of available tenants. So that would be one model. You could go lower to 50 or 60%. You could also, Dan suggested, I think at the last workshop, that you come in with an average, so there was no set. When you do 100%, you tend to get all your tenants are 90 or 100%. You know, they're up at the higher range because it's easier to find more people that can afford to do it and pass the background checks and everything they have to do. When you move further down the line, it becomes a little harder perhaps because you have less people who fit into that maximum or minimum. So that's 2 extra questions you have to consider.
So I'm going to try this one. I think we covered some of those topics tonight. And let me suggest we distribute the memo and put it on the agenda again and pick it up in a couple of weeks.
I support that.
I do too. I think we might want to talk about mixed income specifically, John, because that's kind of coming up and we're dancing around it with the 75% average and Paloma's comments about intergenerational. So that might be helpful.
Yeah. My memory of, and I haven't looked at the Dutchess County housing needs assessment for a few months. My memory is that when they looked at, if you look at the final table in the very end recommendation section, it sets out how many interventions you should have in each one of the communities in Dutchess County. And Beacon's were actually very low because, according to their breakdown, Beacon had a lot of availability at lower income levels compared to the town of Fishkill or the town of East Fishkill or the town of Poughkeepsie or some of the larger scale communities that are more suburban in nature. So, you know, that housing needs assessment at least suggests that Beacon is covering the lower end of the spectrum fairly well compared to everywhere else. And that we might look at a more flexible model where you had a range of AMI levels.
The graph did, for Beacon specifically, did point out that we are doing okay between $50,000 and I think up to 75 plus? Maybe more. Anyway, the highest end, we're having a hard time, and below 50,000, we're having a hard time, in Beacon specifically, accking to the county.
So
But anyway, we'll get into it. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll look at that again because, it was surprising to me that they were only saying we should have 5 interventions over the next, I can't remember the period, but whereas places like Poughkeepsie and Fishkill and East Fishkill had 30-some. So it was obviously targeting the more suburban communities because they didn't have any supply. Their fair share was very low compared to Beacon.
They had a formula for the fair share that was based on 4 things. So I'll bring that back so that we can understand how that number got.
So here's what I hear, which is we started talking about senior, but we've also morphed into kind of the broader discussion. We might want to do an overlay or not. We may limit, I think are talking about being broader than just senior. So let's, for the next time, keep the criteria because the questions actually seem to be relevant regardless of what we're doing. Let's bring to the table the county study so we have some data, and we'll keep going. That's all right? And again, I just was sensing a little fatigue, thinking, these are hard stuff. And we also have to get them to sink in, right? Because we're just getting used to the ideas. So if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to add one more thing to the mix, which is that we did say that we wanted our next community quarterly to be on the topic of housing. And we are having a hard time with this topic, with a lot of context and framing. And so I want to make sure it is set according to our current schedule, and we can obviously change it if we want to launch in 2 weeks. Which means that we would have to have a framing question and context by our next workshop, which I don't have a specific proposal for everybody, but just wanted to throw that out to the rest of council to be thinking about.
I think actually this question that Lee was kind of getting at around what would you find acceptable in your neighborhood? That's not the right wording for it, but what would you want in your neighborhood? What are your concerns? What kind of housing would you be open to, and what would you have some challenges with? I think getting some feedback around that, worded a lot better than I did, I think would be.
Yeah, I think we would want it to be focused. Again, one of our criteria for our questions is that it has to be solutions-oriented. We want to be having suggestions that are based off, that are generative and not exclusionary. So we have to make sure that the question is being framed in the correct way for that. But yes, I think we're saying the same thing.
Okay. So there is one other item. I think we need to do a short executive session to on a couple of quick topics, personnel and contracts.
Yes.
Would that be okay? So can I get a motion to go to executive session on personnel and contracts?
Motion to go into executive session on personnel and contracts and conduct no further business thereafter, straight adjournment.
Molly is the motion.
Second.
Thank you, John.
Jess
Thanks,
is the
John.
second. And just push
Thank
it
you,
over
John.
there. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.